Now we're going to move on to learning goal number 2, in which, having triaged the section and found a passage that you would like to do now, you triage the questions and make sure you're doing the questions in the most efficient order as possible also. We are actually going to take a look at that passage about the modern girl from learning goal 1. We'll read it, make a passage outline, and then take a look at the questions with an eye to how we triage the questions to be most efficient. So here it is, the modern girl passage. Go ahead and take 3 or 4 minutes if you'd like to time yourself, read this passage, and make an outline. Then we'll come back, show you an example outline together, and then go through the questions and triage the questions appropriately. So let's take a look at paragraph 1 here. We're getting the idea that the modern girl is the main focus of this passage. There's a lot of details about the modern girl here, and so you can kind of just skim through and get the idea of those. But then we get to this point at the end where the author says that this modern girl is not easily defined despite knowing all these details. And then we get the question, who was this modern girl? Why did she do what she did? We don't really know what she did yet. We don't really know who this modern girl was other than the details we get in the passage. So there's obviously a lot to come. But we're basically, from this paragraph, just getting the idea that at some point we're going to explain the modern girl. All we've got so far, though, for paragraph 1 is the modern girl. Details about her, and then we'll see where she goes. Moving into the second paragraph, we do see the goal of explaining a little bit more about the modern girl happening here. We see that she was rescued from a depoliticized representation. And notice the author's use of the word rescued. Rescued means that the modern girl was taken from something bad, this depoliticized representation, and brought into somewhere good by being placed along the history of working militant Japanese women. So we can start to see the author's opinion formed here about being depoliticized was a bad thing, and then the modern girl represented more than that. She's rescued by having her image placed alongside working militant Japanese women. So they're saying the modern girl looked like she wasn't involved in politics, looks like she wasn't really involved in social change, and then she was actually after that compared to working militant Japanese women who were taking part in social change, were taking part in politics, and possibly even moving against tradition. So this modern girl almost at this point seems to have changed a little bit from being depoliticized to now being more politicized. They said the modern girl was apolitical and then non-working later, seems or appears as a means to displace the very real militancy of Japanese women. So again, we kind of get a reiteration of that first sentence there. The modern girl looked apolitical, looked like she wasn't working for social change, even though women in Japan really were. And that begins to appear as though she's displacing or making light of this hard work that the Japanese women are doing. She is here compared to the American woman during the 1920s, and now she was trivialized by comparisons to the flapper. And then we get this but keyword here. The American woman allowed herself to be depoliticized by new consumerism. That's different than the modern Japanese women who remain truly militant. So we're getting a comparison here. The American woman was depoliticized by being compared to the flapper, whereas this modern Japanese woman ended up being truly militant despite being compared to the modern girl. Then we get some details about militancy here, and then the Japanese state's response to the Japanese woman's militancy. Finally, we get the idea at the end that the modern girl really is a portrayal that's given to us from the media. So for an outline for this paragraph, you might choose something like the origins of the modern girl and talk about militant women and the government response, and finally the media production of that modern girl. Let's move over into paragraph 3, which is a nice short paragraph. That's a nice little break in a long, otherwise pretty heavy passage. It's a contrast sentence because it starts with the word yet. And there's not tons of extra information here. The modern girl might have displaced serious concern about the radical nature of women's activities, but this still doesn't address her multifaceted nature. So paragraph 3 is almost kind of a setup for explaining more of her multifaceted nature in later paragraphs. So you can put something like, modern girl did distract attention from these militant women. She was also complex, hard to understand. So let's see what paragraph 4 ends up saying about this multifaceted nature of the modern girl. The author poses a question at the beginning of paragraph 4 here. Remember, authors usually use rhetorical questions in order to make an emphasis in part of their passage. So in this case, this question is going to say, here's the answer to your question. Here's why the modern girl is so multifaceted, why she has this complicated nature. These rhetorical questions are good places to snap to attention and find what you're looking for in the passage. Why was this modern girl so hard to understand? She was Japanese and Western. She was intellectual and worker, but she was also deviant and admirable. And then finally, there's an answer. The answer is suggested by Natalie Davis. It says in Women on Top, and we get this idea of an unruly woman in Europe. So we have the modern girl in Japan, the flapper in America, and the unruly woman in Europe. The idea here is that the modern girl and this unruly woman are so complex because they do two things. They reinforce social structure, so women staying in their places like they always have traditionally, and they incite women for change into militant action in public and in private. So, of course, this modern girl and this unruly woman are so complex. They do two different opposite things. They reinforce the social structure of what it looks like to be a traditional woman, and they incite traditional women to make changes. The author agrees that the modern girl is very much like the unruly woman because she meets these two requirements. And we get at the end that the modern girl was a multifaceted symbol and questioned common social structures. So an outline for this paragraph, you want to put Natalie Davis because that's a new person that the author is introducing. There is that unruly woman in Europe that answered the question of what is the modern girl, and the modern girl is two different things, reinforcing of social structures and also challenging those social structures. Paragraph 5 introduces us to a new person, Kitamura, and she was claiming that there's a lot of inevitable struggles in society, labor, tenancy, household, between men and women, and then finally there's this new struggle over good conduct that's pitting Japanese against Western behavior. And finally, we get the modern girl in this paragraph, as the modern girl is just what the media produced to work out this struggle. These struggles resulted in a media portrayal of this modern girl. You can write something along these lines in your outline. Kitamura is the person the author introduced, and then the modern girl worked out this struggle. Finally, we are to the last paragraph. We're seeing that the modern girl stood for this change instigated by actually both men and women during an era of this economic crisis, this social unrest. There's these details about the different types of social unrest that were going on. We're seeing there's inversions of capitalized words like the good wife and the wise mother that the modern girl is representing. We're seeing here that traditional womanhood has become kind of a repository of the past, and all of this wraps up in the modern girl. So we can say something along the lines of that the modern girl, or MG, we're abbreviating it here, stood for change. Change in society, change in women's behavior. So here's the passage outline. Altogether, you should have something like this written down where there's space in your book. And finally, we have to do the last step of reading through a passage, and that's to write our goal. A good goal for this passage could be to show how the modern girl influenced modern Japanese culture. And with that outline made, we're ready to jump into the questions. Now go ahead and take a look at all 6 of these questions right now, and just using a quick glance, trying to figure out just briefly what the question is looking for you to do, decide whether that's a question that you should do right here and now, or if it's a question that you should triage for later. In other words, go through and triage all 6 of these questions so you get the practice of what it feels like to triage. Take a very, very short time, no more than 30 seconds, for the whole process. Triage all these questions, and then we'll go over them. So number 1, we see that this question ends in the word except. What that means is that there's 3 details in here that are from the passage and 1 that's not, and we're going to have to go look them all up. We like to call these a scattered type detail question, and what they do is take a lot of time to answer. Because of this, you want to save it for later. 1, just because it takes time, but 2, if you're going to have to look up details to answer reasoning type questions or even just simple detail questions, you're going to have to go back to the passage a lot. You're going to be more comfortable with the passage by the time that you get to this scattered type detail question, and so it's going to be even faster when you do finally do number 1. So we'll go ahead and skip number 1 for now and move on to number 2. And in this one, we're trying to weaken the author's claim about the significance of the modern girl. So this is a strength and weaken question, and it's giving us new information about the passage, so we're reasoning a little bit beyond the text. However, the question's asking us about the significance of the modern girl. Well, the author's whole point is about the significance of the modern girl. So this is a question about the central idea of the passage. So it, of course, is going to be a decision you make on your own as to whether to do it now or later, but for our purposes here, this counts as a question you should do now. Yes, it's got some tough reasoning in it. However, it's about the main idea, which we've already reflected upon in writing a goal, so we should be able to do this one now. It's a tough call. It's on the cusp of being something that you should skip for later, but we'll go ahead and do it now just because it's about that main idea. So let's think about the author's claim about the significance of the modern girl. We can think that the author's main argument was the modern girl was significant, and we can even look to the passage for a quote, a vital symbol of overwhelming non-Japanese change away from Japanese traditions. So we're looking for something that would weaken that, something that would say maybe the modern girl wasn't a significant symbol of change. We can find that in our answer choices, and then that'll be the correct answer. So looking through our answer choices, A, if Japanese women did not associate the modern girl's behavior with Western influences, that would definitely weaken the author's claim about the significance of the modern girl. If Japanese people didn't think that the modern girl represented Western influences, the modern girl wouldn't have been able to be a part and be a symbol of the change to Western behavior. So A seems like it's going to work for us for a correct answer. Let's check out the other answer choices real quick just to make sure though. B, if the modern girl disappeared from Japanese media in World War II, that's a bit of an out-of-scope answer. We were talking about the 20s. We weren't talking about any world wars, so that's not going to work for us. Answer choice C, if the social unrest in the 1920s was less than other countries at the time, that still doesn't mean the modern girl couldn't have stood for whatever social unrest did happen in Japan at the 1920s. So C, again, is going to not work for us and be basically another irrelevant kind of out-of-scope detail. Answer choice D is also going to be wrong because it's a pretty extreme answer. The author in this passage doesn't exclude other cultural figures. The author just simply says that the modern girl does have influence and excludes the whole conversation of other media portrayals or any type of figure having particular influence. So D isn't going to work for us. So A does end up being a correct answer here. Let's move over to number 3. And we're looking for why the author included an example of the unruly women in paragraph 4. So again, this is reasoning right within the text here. We're looking for why the author did something. And there is a passage reference also, paragraph 4. So this is going to be pretty easy to go back and look up. In this case, it's something that you should do now. You will have to go back, really briefly look up this idea of the unruly woman in paragraph 4, and then figure out why the author did it. So here's what it says in paragraph 4. And we see that the author brought up this unruly woman to answer the question at the beginning of paragraph 4. Why is this modern girl Japanese and Western, intellectual and worker, deviant, admirable? Why is she so complex? So we're trying to answer this question of why is the modern girl so complex? We need to find that in the answer choices. Go ahead and pick that now. Looking through our answer choices with the prediction in mind to explain the complexities of the modern girl, we see that A isn't going to work for us. A is actually about Japan, whereas the unruly woman was actually from Europe, and that's also the same problem with the D. The unruly woman was from Europe, not America. So A and D are faulty use of detail because the unruly woman was European. Answer choice B, about the gender conflicts that were inevitable, that's the wrong person. Answer choice B is using those details a little faulty as well. Kitamura suggested that gender conflicts were inevitable, not Natalie Davis. So our only choice here that works is answer choice C, and it matches our prediction very well. We were looking for something that said the unruly woman was brought up to explain how complicated the modern girl was. Okay, let's move on to number 4. In this one, we're looking for a claim made by the author, but it's not supported. And we can support it by evidence, we can support it by explanation, we can support it by example. But we have to go back and find each of these answer choices in the passage, and then also make the decision, are they supported by evidence, explanation, or example? Again, this is a time eater of a question. The details are scattered throughout the passage. This is something that you want to save for later to make sure you get the easier points, or at least the quicker points out of the way. So we'll skip it for now and come back to it, and move on to number 5. In number 5, we're trying to work through an assumption that the author is making. So this is an inference type question. We're going to have to analyze the author's logical reasoning, and this is a tough call when it comes to question triage. If you like doing logical argument type things, and you like researching and finding what the author could be assuming, reasoning that out, it's a question you should do now. If that's not something that you like to do because that is a bit of trickier reasoning, then you can skip it for later. So really, you'll definitely want to write your own answer in here. We're going to go ahead and do it now, but you could really choose to do this one now or later. This is an example of just a tough call when it comes to triaging. Something right in the middle of doing it now or doing it later. So let's go ahead and walk through this. And remember, we're just looking for something that the author must have assumed about the modern girl. So let's go through the answers one by one. It's hard to predict. We really just have to use reasoning here. A, Japanese women in the 1920s viewed Gimbura as incompatible with economic advancement. Now, the modern girl did participate in Gimbura, but even if Japanese women viewed that as incompatible with economic advancement, that wouldn't have meant that the modern girl couldn't be a symbol for change. A is not going to work for us because it really just doesn't have anything to do with the author's claim about the modern girl being a symbol for change. And we can move on to B. B says Western nations were not influenced by Japanese cultural traditions. This actually has almost nothing to do with the passage. It was the author's claim that Japanese traditions were being influenced by Western behavior. So B is kind of a backwards answer, and therefore it doesn't have anything to do with the argument about the modern girl. Moving on to C, the modern girl's influence contrasted with the influence of the Mobo. Again, the modern girl could have had exactly the influence that she did, and the Mobo or the modern boy would have had a different influence. It's not pertinent to the modern girl being this symbol for change. Answer choice C doesn't work for us. We're able to take a step back and realize A, B, and C don't affect the author's main focus about the modern girl being this symbol for change, and therefore D ends up having to be our answer. Now let's take a look at D. Political activities can be influenced by media portrayals. Oh good, this one works great. The modern girl stood as a symbol for change, and the modern girl was indeed a media portrayal. Media portrayals must then be able to influence political activities and social change because that's exactly what the modern girl did. So this assumption that that can be done has to be true, or else the modern girl couldn't have done what she did. Finally, we'll take a look at number 6, and this is an interesting one where you're being asked to reason which pairs in the answer choice look like the Japanese and American women that the author discusses in the passage. This one's going to take a lot of reasoning as you go through the answers and try to understand what each answer choice means and then compare it to the Japanese and American women from the passage. And you would probably have to go back and look up Japanese and American women as well. This is another example of that you skipped for right now. You do go back to paragraph 2, you do some research, and then you just have a lot of tough reasoning to go through before you can get to your answer. It's going to take a while and it's going to be a hard point to get, so we'll leave it for later. So now we've done 3 of the questions and we're left 3 of the questions for later. Let's do those harder questions now. We have those 2 scattered detail questions. Number 1 is one of them. And in this case, we have to go through, find each of these references in the passage. And then the one that we don't find is our correct answer because this is an all except question. So go ahead and do your passage research and come back with your answer. Answer choice A, you can find in paragraph 5. Answer choice B is in paragraph 2. And answer choice C is stated in paragraph 4, so D is actually the only answer that works. While the media is discussed, the accountability of the media is not discussed in this passage, and that works for our answer. So again, it's not terribly difficult to reason through this question, but it takes a lot of time to look up each of these details. We had also skipped question 4. This one was a really difficult scattered detail type question because you have to find all of these details in the passage and then pick the one that's just not supported by evidence, explanation, or example. Remember, this is a not question, so we're looking for something that wasn't supported. So go ahead and research this in the passage and come back with your answer. Answer A is supported in paragraph 2 with some examples there. Answer B is also in paragraph 2, but this is where we get our correct answer. That females in America lost their status due to new consumerism. That's just a one-off sentence, and then the author goes back to talking about Japanese cultures and traditions and how the modern girl is affecting them. So your answer choice B actually does work for our answer. Just to continue along our elimination though, answer choice C is supported in paragraph 6 with explanations and examples like the good wife and the wise mother. And then answer choice D, definitely there's lots of different roles of the modern girl covered beyond just political issues like conduct and culture. So answer choice B is our correct answer. Finally, we're going to hit that tough reasoning in question 6, the last question that we left for later. And we need to go back to the passage and think about the Japanese and American women workers and how they compared to one another. So when you go back to the passage and research that, we see that the woman worker had allowed herself to be depoliticized, and the modern Japanese woman was truly militant. Militant meaning here that she stuck to what she decided to stick to in the first place. So basically, the American woman almost failed at sticking to being a voice in politics and a voice for cultural change, whereas the modern Japanese woman of the 1920s hadn't done that. So we're looking for a choice in our answers where one of the parties didn't end up following something to completion and the other one did. Go ahead and find that answer now. The correct answer is B. One continues pressing for better terms, one doesn't. And with that, you're finished with the modern girl passage. It's an example of one of the pretty difficult CARS passages that you would see on the test, and you've gotten through it by following along with this lesson, so congratulations on that. Let's do a review of what we learned. The review page here at the end of lesson 7.4 is going to be good for you to come back to and review on your own when you're trying to recall how to best triage a section, where you do the easier passages first and save the hard ones for later. And there's different details about how you do that and what to look for while you're doing the triage steps. Down at the bottom half of the page, there's also question triage, so you can come back and review later details about what to look for in the questions to decide whether they're difficult or easy, and a reminder to do the easier questions first. Congratulations on getting through this lesson with the Modern Girl passage and learning about section triaging and question triaging within the CARS section. Now you're better equipped to make your very own personalized strategy to get through an MCAT CARS section efficiently and effectively on your test. Best of luck in your studies.